The race for space. Is the next battle looming? Introduction. Back to the stars, but why? Imagine you are thousands of miles above Earth in a tiny spacecraft. The future of humanity rests in your hands, and you are part of a global race deciding planetary supremacy. And what do? You sneak a sandwich on board. That is exactly what astronaut John Young did during the Gemini 3 mission, pulling a corned beef sandwich out of his sleeve to share with his commander Gus Grissom. This was much to the dismay of Mission Control, which feared the crumbs might clog sensitive instruments. Almost as legendary is the mysterious stranger that caused panic on the Apollo 10 mission when it floated past the cockpit. It quickly became clear that it was a human product left behind by a crew member. Picture the first flying fecal sphere, a detail made famous by a NASA transcript. Cold War stories like these show that the space race that captivated a generation was full of hilarious and deeply human moments. The great triumphs, the technical milestones, the epic rivalries, all played out with a touch of chaos and humor. The great competition between the United States and the USSR is long over, but space has lost none of its allure. Quite the opposite. We are now in a new era where more nations and private entities are striving for space than ever before. The central question is the old rivalry truly history? Or are we on the brink of a new, far more complex and potentially dangerous struggle for control of space? To understand this, you need to know the past and decipher the present. Chapter 1. The Cold War in Space, a tale of two superpowers. The original space race was less a battle for celestial bodies and more a showdown fought on Earth. It was a proxy war that mirrored the fundamental rivalry of the Cold War between the communist Soviet Union and the capitalist United States. The technological advances, fueled by pre-war German rocketry, were seen as crucial for national security and political superiority. The goal was to demonstrate the dominance of one's own system without triggering a direct military conflict. The starting gun fired on October 4, 1957, when the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1. Less than a month later, on November 3, 1957, they cemented their lead with Sputnik 2, carrying the dog Laika as the first living creature into Earth orbit, a tragic but groundbreaking milestone, as the mission was planned as a one-way trip from the start. The United States responded on January 31, 1958, with the launch of Explorer 1, a more modest satellite that nonetheless marked the United States' entry into the race. The race intensified on April 12, 1961, when the Soviet Union achieved perhaps the greatest triumph of the entire competition. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth in the Vostok 1 capsule, becoming the first human in space. His 108-minute flight around the Earth amazed millions, and his safe return was a monumental victory. United States scientists were devastated, seeing themselves far behind technologically. Just weeks later, on May 25, 1961, United States President John F. Kennedy responded with a bold promise to Congress that would galvanize the nation. An American would stand on the moon before the end of the decade. This promise culminated on July 20, 1969, when the Apollo 11 mission landed American astronaut Neil Armstrong as the first human on the moon. It was a triumphant moment for the United States, essentially ending the initial race. The technology that made this success possible was a mix of state-of-the-art and astonishingly analog design. The Apollo guidance computer, known as AGC, the brain of the spacecraft, used rope memories. These programs were hand-woven by women in the suburbs of Boston, hired for their experience in the textile industry, proving how the remarkable connection between human craftsmanship and emerging digital technology ushered in a new age. The Cold War space race was not just a series of achievements. It was a symbolic battle demonstrating the strength of the respective political systems. It was also a lesson in pragmatism. After 2 decades of intense competition and ideological Cold War, tensions on Earth began to ease. This thaw process led to the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975, when a United States Apollo spacecraft and a Soviet Soyuz capsule docked in space, and commanders Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov exchanged the first international handshake. This act of cooperation showed how closely space activities were linked to terrestrial geopolitics, and served as a powerful reminder that space can also be a place for collaboration. Despite its political charge, this historical era was profoundly human, reflected in the many anecdotes. Mercury astronaut Wally Schirra played jingle bells on a harmonica during the Gemini 6A mission, becoming the first person to play an instrument in space. And the story of Alan Shepard, who during the Apollo 14 mission hit a few balls on the moon with a makeshift golf club and cheekily claimed they flew miles and miles and miles, shows that the pioneers of space travel were not just scientific robots, but adventurers who brought human ingenuity and humor into the vast beyond. Now, a brief Cold War space race. Timeline: October 4th, 1957, November 3rd, 1957, January 31st, 1958, April 12th, 1961, May 25th, 1961, July 20th, 1969. Chapter 2: The New Galactic Gang, Nations, Billionaires, and New Space. The old world of the space race is history, and the new world is no longer just a duel between two states. It is a crowded playground full of new players. Instead of focusing solely on state actors, a multitude of nations and private companies are now pushing onto the space stage. The People's Republic of China, driven by the China National Space Administration, CNSA, has made massive strides. It operates its own space station Tiangong and conducts an ambitious lunar program Chang'e and a Mars mission Tianwen-1. The country now performs the most, or the second most, launches of satellites into Earth orbit each year. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, has also achieved remarkable success with its Mars orbiter mission and Chandrayaan lunar missions, demonstrating its capabilities with a smaller budget compared to other space agencies. Japan, Israel, and many other nations have also become major players. The US is back with the ambitious Artemis program, aiming to establish a long-term presence on the moon as a stepping stone for a crewed mission to Mars. The European Space Agency, ESA, is also an important player, coordinating the efforts of its 23 member states and collaborating with NASA on the Artemis mission. However, arguably the biggest change in recent years is the rise of new space, driven by private companies. SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk, is considered the titan of the industry. The company has revolutionized space travel by developing reusable rockets like the Falcon and creating the world's most powerful transportation vehicle with the Starship system. SpaceX's stated goal is to make humanity multiplanetary by building a self-sustaining city on Mars. With a valuation in the hundreds of billions of dollars and the ability to launch satellites at an unprecedented frequency, SpaceX is an unmissable actor. Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin is also an important competitor, focusing on reusable rocket technology and securing key contracts with NASA. Other companies include Rocket Lab, specializing in the small satellite market, and Axiom Space, which is building a commercial space station module for the International Space Station. The new space race is therefore not just a competition between governments, but a complex web of partnerships. Governments leverage the agility and innovation of private companies to reduce costs and risks. In return, the companies receive lucrative contracts and a guaranteed customer base. The U.S. Space Force, for example, actively works with the private sector to secure vital satellite capabilities and ensure dominance in space technology. In the new era of space travel, it's not just about government programs and budgets, but about a nation's ability to utilize the innovations of its private sector. This also explains why China employs its own state-owned enterprises like the Chinese Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, CASC. Ultimately, the new space race is no longer driven solely by ideology, but fundamentally by economic interests. The space industry is projected to generate over $1 trillion in revenue by 2040. The goal is no longer just supremacy on Earth, but supremacy in a new, incredibly lucrative economic space. The declining entry costs for space travel have paved the way for venture capital and the pursuit of profits. The billionaire's race for space perfectly reflects this shift. It is a race for wealth, sometimes resulting in lucrative exclusive deals for wealthier countries and corporations. This gives the question why go to space a new, entirely pragmatic answer: for the money. Chapter 3. The Moon Rush, a race for resources and real estate. The new heart of the race is an unexpected place: the Moon's South Pole. It is not a fight for a mundane lunar landscape, but for a location that holds a crucial resource for the future of space travel: water ice. The ice in the permanently shadowed craters could be a kind of cosmic goldmine. This water is not only vital for astronauts, it can also be split into its chemical components: hydrogen H2 and oxygen O2. These gases are the main components of rocket fuel, especially in liquid form, liquid oxygen, or LOX, and liquid hydrogen, or LH2. With the ability to manufacture fuel directly on the moon could become a kind of refueling station for missions to Mars and beyond. This would significantly reduce the complexity and cost of deep space missions, because not all fuel and water would have to be carried from Earth. But this is where the real battle begins. The race for resources on the moon is deeply legal. The foundation is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, signed by 117 nations, including all major spacefaring nations. It states that outer space is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. The question now is whether the use of resources, the mining of raw materials by private companies, constitutes a form of national appropriation. This is where opinions diverge. The United States and Luxembourg have enacted national laws that explicitly permit private companies to mine space resources. Russia and China, however, argue that the Outer Space Treaty prohibits the mining and possession of resources. To clarify this legal gray area, the United States and its allies created the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords are non-binding multilateral agreements based on the Outer Space Treaty, and they explicitly emphasize that the extraction of space resources does not in itself constitute national appropriation under Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. So it is not just about scientific discoveries, but also about creating a precedent. The nation that operates first at the moon's south pole can leverage a first-mover advantage and unilaterally determine what is considered legally appropriate. This includes establishing safety zones around their equipment that could deny access to other actors. The Artemis Accords are therefore not just a framework for cooperation, but a strategic attempt to shape the rules of the game in favor of the signatories. The opposition from Russia and China, who view these agreements as an attempt by the United States to establish an exclusive space order, shows that the battle for the moon is already underway on diplomatic and legal levels. This situation reveals a fundamental paradox: the ideal of space as the province of all mankind and the common heritage of mankind stands in direct contradiction to its immense economic potential. For example, the asteroid 16 Psyche, whose gold value is estimated at $10,000 quadrillion. The Moon Treaty of 1979 failed because it practically prohibited commercial mining, which is why it was rejected by the major space powers. In this wild west of space law, the greed for limitless resources could lead to serious conflicts if no global, universally accepted rules are found. Chapter 4. The Digital Battlefield: Satellites, Surveillance, and Debris. The new battleground is not just the moon, but also the crowded low Earth orbit. This area is populated by thousands of satellites launched in massive mega-constellations by companies such as SpaceX with Starlink, Amazon with Project Kuiper, and Eutelsat with OneWeb. Although touted as internet providers, these constellations are a prime example of dual-use technologies. They serve both civilian and military purposes. Their commercial nature masks the strategic military applications they offer, such as communication for ground troops, precise targeting, reconnaissance, surveillance, and intelligence. Governments are deliberately collaborating with the private sector to secure a technological advantage in the space domain. For the U.S. military, independent satellite constellations enable strategic autonomy and control over critical infrastructure and data. U.S. Army General Donald K. Brooks emphasizes that space is the connective tissue for all warfighting functions. The US Space Force is also actively seeking collaborations to secure dominance in space technology. The same satellites that provide internet to remote villages can also track an opponent's movements. The separation between civilian and military use is increasingly blurred, making the competition in the new era much more complex. The battle is no longer fought solely by national space agencies, but by entire national commercial ecosystems. The price of this rapid expansion is a growing danger that threatens the entire space community. Space debris, thousands of dead satellites, discarded rocket stages, and millions of smaller pieces of debris race around Earth at incredibly high speeds. The increasing number of satellites, especially the mega-constellations, significantly raises the risk of collisions. The bogeyman looming over space travel is Kessler syndrome. This theoretical phenomenon describes a chain reaction in which a single collision triggers a cascade of debris that could render certain Earth orbits unusable for future generations. The problem is already real. In 2019, the European Space Agency had to maneuver its active satellite system for the first time to avoid a collision with a Starlink satellite. The paradox of dominance becomes particularly clear here. The pursuit of full-spectrum dominance through the deployment of massive satellite constellations could lead to a collective catastrophe that denies access to space for everyone, even the most dominant power. This is an irony that represents the true threat of the new space struggle. The contest of satellite constellations includes these major programs: Starlink, OneWeb, Project Kuiper. Chapter 5. The Handshake in Orbit. Is cooperation still possible? Amidst all the talk of competition, resources, and military dominance, it is crucial to consider the opposite: the history and present of cooperation in space. The historic handshake between Americans and Soviets during the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975 was not just a symbolic act, but a tangible sign of a thaw in relations between the two superpowers. This legacy of collaboration culminated in the International Space Station, perhaps the greatest masterpiece of international cooperation in human history. For decades, the International Space Station has united former rivals in a common project that has pushed the boundaries of what is possible. It is a vital test environment for understanding and overcoming the challenges of long-duration space travel. Cooperation is also a central pillar of modern space travel. NASA's Artemis program, designed to return the United States to the forefront of lunar exploration, is not just a national effort. It is a global alliance involving 56 nations, including the European Space Agency, which supplies the Orion spacecraft and other critical components. Even the China National Space Administration frequently collaborates with other international organizations on its missions. It can be argued that this cooperation is not based merely on noble ideals, but on a simple, pragmatic necessity. Space travel is incredibly expensive and complex. Large projects like the International Space Station and the Artemis program are so massive that no single nation could finance or execute them alone. By coordinating financial and intellectual resources, nations can undertake programs and activities that far exceed the capabilities of a single country. Cooperation thus becomes a strategic necessity to achieve common goals, even amidst intense competition. Conclusion: a sprint, a marathon, or something else entirely? The question of whether a battle for space is looming cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. The new era is not a simple remake of the Cold War, but a complex, multi-layered strategic game. The players are more diverse, the motives more complex, and the threats more collective. The competition is not just between governments like the US and China, but also between billionaires and their companies. It is driven not only by military ambitions, but also by immense economic potential. And it takes place not only in orbit, but also in the courtrooms and at United Nations conferences, where the rules for the exploitation of space are being rewritten. The battle for space is therefore not so much an imminent belligerent conflict, but rather a strategic tug-of-war for position in a new, untapped economic and military domain. The goal is not just prestige, but control over the resources that could define the next era of human civilization. Yet, the future depends on whether cooperation can keep pace with competition. Humanity faces collective threats like space debris and the Kessler syndrome, which threaten all nations equally. The irony of the situation is that to unlock the infinite possibilities of space, humanity must learn to prioritize common interests over short-term rivalries. What awaits us is an exciting, unknown future. The path to space will not only enable humanity to find new homes beyond Earth, but will also deliver a wealth of spin-off technologies that improve our lives on Earth. Many of the innovations developed by NASA, from memory foam to CMOS image sensors, have long become part of our daily lives. Space travel not only advances science but also inspires a new generation of engineers and explorers. It is a reflection of our human nature, the desire to play, explore, and compete, but also the need to cooperate and grow. The path we choose now will determine whether humanity sets out for the stars as warriors, as pioneers, or as something entirely new.